we always pray for a baby boy? That was the first big question I remember asking. I must have been 5 or 6, watching my mother whispering wishes for a son after every prayer. I already had sisters. We were happy, but still, every evening, another prayer for a boy. And I remember thinking, why? What's so special about a son? Aren't we enough? That small question, asked out of innocent curiosity, cracked something open. It showed me that some traditions do not make sense, and sometimes the world needs a gentle nudge, or a very loud, persistent why. That moment taught me the first rule of change. Don't accept what doesn't sit right. Question it. Eventually, my curiosity sharpened and I began noticing how the subtle patriarchy was quietly shaping the world around me. The birth of a son brought sweets and celebrations, and birth of a daughter, it brought silence, and sometimes even disappointment. Despite all the love in our family, my parents also felt the unspoken pressure of raising daughters in a society where sons are seen as legacy bearers. And they had 7 of us. And every time my relatives visited, they offered not congratulations, but pity. So I asked again, why do you feel bad for us? Why is son seen as a blessing while a daughter a burden? At first, those questions were met with discomfort, a nervous laughter, and sometimes even a quick change of topic. But in that resistance, I learned something deeper. People don't always challenge traditions because they have never been asked to. And once the question is asked, really asked, it becomes harder to ignore. Eventually, my questions made their way into my parents' mind too, and they began to wonder as well. What if we didn't need a son to carry forward our name? What if we raised our daughters in a way who could stand tall on their own That quiet revolution started at home. My parents decided to send all 7 of us to school, even when it strained our finances. Today, all 7 of us are formally educated. 3 have finished their higher education, rest are enrolled in colleges and in a school, and 2 are earning and thriving, rewriting the script that once told us we were less. That's the power of asking the questions. Because sometimes when you ask why, it forces people to rethink what they have always accepted as the norm. History has been shaped by those who have asked the right questions. Take Isaac Newton. He asked why apple fell downwards, not sideways, discovering the laws of motion. Galileo, on the other hand, asked why objects move differently on inclined planes. Together, the questions built the foundation of modern physics, opening doors to rockets, space, planes, and whatnot. But it's not just about physics. Charles Darwin, he saw birds with different beaks and asked why did they evolve this way, leading to the theory of natural selection. Darwin's questions have helped us to understand natural world, but the impact of questioning goes deeper. It's not just about science or discovery, it's about how we learn, how we think, and how we grow. And that brings us to the philosophy behind questioning and how the skill of questioning has evolved over time. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, believed that questions, not the answers, were the foundation of wisdom. His method of probing assumptions, challenging perspectives, and questioning the question itself continues to shape how we think today. Building on this, modern theories like that of question-driven understanding argues that our learning is fueled by our knowledge goals. In simpler words, It's about we have some knowledge stored in our head, and then when we come across something unfamiliar, we ask questions. And the act of questioning becomes a learning tool. And that entire process of having some knowledge and then coming across something unfamiliar and then raising a question, that process becomes a learning process. And it concludes that all the greatest minds in the world, they didn't have all the knowledge. They just had better questions. But questioning can be risky too. Questions have the power to challenge norms and sometimes challenge deep-seated like taboos and stigmas. And they also have the power to drive real change. But it's not just about the scientists or the philosophers who have asked the questions and some of them have had unfortunate end. It's true for anyone who dares to challenge the status quo, including myself. When at the very young age of 16, I asked an important question. Why is menstruation such a taboo topic? I grew up in a community where conversations around menstruation were hushed, hidden behind shame and secrecy. But I wanted to know why. Why something so natural was treated like a curse? When I set out to raise awareness around the issue, I faced an even a bigger challenge. No one showed up. Villagers laughed at me, dismissing my efforts as naive. A 16-year-old girl teaching them about menstruation? Impossible, they thought. But I kept asking myself, why won't they come? And that question kept me stuck. So I reframed it and I asked again, how can I convince them to join the campaign? Or what steps did I need to take to encourage participation? And with my father's help, I brainstormed solutions. I offered incentives, samosa snack, everybody loves samosa, tea, and even a Bollywood movie after the workshops. Then I went door to door, inviting people personally and reassuring them. And the results were astonishing. My audience grew from 0 to 100, and then to 150, and soon I was educating nearly 300 women. Over the years, my campaign has evolved. I have shifted the conversation to sustainable menstrual health practices, advocating for reusable sanitary napkins over the single-use and the plastic ones. What started as a struggle to gather an audience turned into a movement, making menstruation a household topic in my village. 4 years later, I presented my work in Norway at World Federation of United Nations Associations, showing how a simple shift in questioning can lead to real change. Today, if you visit my village, women are no longer ashamed or shy. They talk about menstrual health and other public health issues openly and with confidence. We have seen how the right questions can drive change and challenge norms. But the way we frame questions determines whether it sparks action or keeps us stuck. Before we get into how to reframe the questions, I want to start with the first rule of asking questions, which is don't be afraid of asking questions in the first place. Far too often, we hold back because we are scared of sounding ignorant, offending someone, or hearing a truth which we are not ready for. But growth doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we dare to speak up. If I had not asked why is menstruation such a taboo topic, I would have never started a campaign that reached hundreds of women in my village and beyond. So the first rule is simple. Ask questions even if it makes people uncomfortable, because that's where change begins. Let's try a quick exercise of reframing questions in a way that leads to real solutions. Let's take a common example. A fresh graduate like myself in the beginning was frustrated. Why do I not have enough job opportunities? Because these days, entry-level job opportunities require some or the other sort of experience. But the way we frame our question can either keep us stuck or help us move forward. Now, I'm going to move on to the second rule, which is instead of asking why, ask how. Let's say our initial question is, why don't I have more job opportunities? Let's rephrase it. What can I do to create those opportunities for myself? Or what steps do I need to create them for me? When we shift from why to how, we shift our mindset, moving from helplessness to action. So how do we create opportunities? We do that by expanding our network, building relevant skills, and putting ourselves out there through conversations, internships, and courses. But reframing questions is important, but there are other more important roles. And now we're going to move on to the third and another very important rule which I believe everyone should know. The third rule is be specific. While asking your questions, try to be specific because vague questions lead to vague answers. You can do this by framing your open-ended questions as closed ones in order to receive an accurate, a direct, or a very specific answer. Let's say you're asking yourself, why can't I succeed? Instead of that question, try asking yourself, what first 3 steps do I need to take this week to move closer to my goal? I'll give you an example. Let's say we are struggling with a physical activity, and then I'm asking myself, why can't I run 2 kilometers like others? And then I'm reframing the question, and then I ask, what habits or routines can I include in my lifestyle to improve my stamina over time? You see the difference? The first question leads to comparison and frustration, and the second, it leads to intentional reflection. But you do not need to know the answers right away. But asking right questions can set you up to find it. Moving on to the fourth rule, which is seek root causes. We have seen how reframing questions can help us take action, but sometimes we need to dig deeper. So instead of asking, why is this happening? Ask, what's causing it? That's the shift I made when I started researching about rural Muslim women's electoral behavior in local politics. It all began during one of the menstrual health workshops in Village A, where after the sessions, women treating me like a superhero, they would gather around me and share their concerns, political opinions, and stories from their lives. And one day, they said something I did not expect. They asked me, can you contest elections for us? Can you be our representative? I was shocked, even taken aback for a bit. And I was sad at the same time. I thought maybe they themselves didn't run for the office because they thought they were the minority in that village and they might not get enough vote. But then I went to village B where they were the majority and I heard the same thing. Women there told me that they never had more than one Muslim female pradhan since independence. But they voted actively, but they never ran for office. That contradiction raised a bigger question. Why do rural Muslim women vote actively but never run for office in Uttar Pradesh? When I set out to find answers, I realized that question needed lot many more smaller questions to be first answered, such as, do these women see themselves as leaders? Do they even have time or space to think beyond their daily survival? Who takes all the decisions in their household and who controls all the money? If they could lead, what would they want to change? Those were the real questions, and the answers were not simple. So I spent a year researching about the issue and came to the conclusion that rural Muslim women's lack of representation was not just about one single reason. It was about the intersection of their gender identity, their rural location, economic dependence, and their religious and cultural norms, working all together to keep them out of politics. This research reaffirmed for me that challenging the status quo is essential. It's not just enough to accept the statistics at face value. We must ask why these disparities exist. And when we ask the right question, we begin to dismantle the systemic barriers that hold people back. That shift in conversation turned into an honors thesis. Later on, I shared my findings at Oxford University, but more than that, this research gave space to those voices that have gone unheard for a very long time. Now we are going to move on to the fifth and the final rule, which is turn your questions into actions. Because questions without an action is just a curiosity. But when followed by a question, it becomes a transformation. For example, when Rosa Parks asked, "Why should I give up my seat just because of the color of my skin?" She didn't just ask that question, she acted immediately. Her decision to remain seated sparked the bus boycott movement in the United States, creating a defining moment in the civil rights movement history. So now you see, when the right question is paired with an action, it has the power to change the world. So I return to the question I began with. Why should you ask questions? Because questions shape the world. They disturb the comfortable. They challenge what we have been told and they light the way forward. But asking questions is not just for scientists or philosophers or activists. It's for the student who wonders why her school lacks resources. It's for the parents who ask how can they raise their kids with fewer biases than they themselves inherited. It's for the leader who challenges the broken system, and it's for the girl who once sat in a room full of sisters and asked, "Aren't we enough?" When my parents asked their own questions, they didn't just shift our family's future. They redefined what legacy could look like. They showed me that questions don't just reveal the crack in traditions, they carve out the space for something new to grow. So before you leave from here today, ask yourself, what truth needs a question in your world? Because right question is not just a sentence, it's a spark. And sometimes it only takes one simple, persistent, a why or a how to set everything in motion. Thank you, everyone.